Hello, good morning. Today our guest is Professor Eelke De Jong. Hello, Eelke. How are you doing?
I'm very fine, and actually it's nice weather here, so.
All right, I am great, Eelke, and today we're going to be talking about your article, National Culture in the Three Types of Market Economies. And these three countries are France, Germany, and America. And we're going to start our conversation by talking about America. Why is America so different?
First of all, I have to say that if you look at a worldwide scale, these countries are not that different in the sense that they all score in the upper level of individualism. So in that sense, they are more or less similar, and there is also Western. So in the category of Heinrich, the weirdest countries of the world, then they belong to the same group. But that being said, the United States is quite different in the sense that individualism the scores on individualism is very high, and the individual is very important. And that has to do with its history. So what the Americans nowadays, and predominantly at least, they come from Europe. They fled Europe because of religious suppression, for example. And then they would like to free themselves and not be suppressed anymore by the bishop or by a king or a queen or whatsoever. So they want to have a governance system in which everybody has a say. That's one thing. And on the other hand, of course, also during their history, they went westwards, and then there came in a frontier mentality as the strong people who are fighting for their own rights and things like that, and the common person who is also working for his or her own well-being, so to speak. So that's a very individualistic attitude, you could say. And they also see it as and competition against nature, a certain type, of course, when we are talking about friendship. And then from that comes also a competition, a sense of competition. And that led to an attitude in which uncertainty is regarded as, of course, to a certain extent bad, but not that bad. You can handle with it, and gives also you some opportunities. A system which is based on the individual rights, with some checks and balances, because we as Americans don't want to have a boss above us. So there should be checks and balances, and that's why it has come more or less this way. And of course, this is also changing over time, also with the inflow from Latin America. But this is still the predominant, basic values in the United States. What is also important is they regard equality and opportunity as very high. But if that leads to inequality and outcomes, that's not that bad, at least in their view, at least if it doesn't go very skew to a very high level, as sometimes it's regarded as today, where you have very poor, many poor people in the United States and very rich people in the same state. So I think that's for the moment at least my summary of the United States.
Why are Americans so willing to tolerate uncertainty?
I think that they have so they had to deal with it because they came in a new country where they didn't know the structure. They also didn't fit into the structure. It's not that they became a clan within the Indian society or so, but they fought against the Indians and settled for themselves. And so they had to struggle with the uncertainty, which certainly comes from nature, in particular in the beginning. Then they got more or less used to the fact of uncertainty. It's not that they like It's nobody likes it in the world, but they can handle it more easily than the inhabitants of the other countries in our study.
And according to your study, and I'm not surprised, Americans tend to be quite trusting. Trust appears to be highest in the United States. Why?
Yeah, that's a very big issue. Once again, trust is high in all three countries, but except maybe France. I don't have the figures over here, but and that has maybe also to do, or maybe there is a study which investigates the determinants of trust, and this is generalized trust. So trust in other people in general, not particularly into your relatives or the people you know or from your village or so, but in general. And what you then see is that the trust in people in general is high in countries in which there is a well-working judicial system and good rules and legislation and things like that. Now that is relevant in all three of these countries. However, and we come to that later, in France, you still have a hierarchy and an elite and the common people, and there's a lot of distrust between these two levels. So between the elite and the lay persons, in particular, though those blue collar workers and the like.
America is the most individualistic country in the West, and according to some studies, trust is associated with individualism. So this could be one reason to explain higher levels of trust in America.
Could be, but now we come into a difficult issue, and that is causality. And causality is very difficult to establish in these type of studies, because what you also see is that income per capita and individualism go in the same direction. And one of the well-known researchers in this area, Hofstede, found already in the beginning of the 1970s that an increase in income per capita leads to a higher score on individualism. So it could be that one way or another, a country comes into a virtuous circle, you could say, in the sense that they are quite individualistic, they have good regulations, they become wealthy, and because they are wealthy, they can improve their regulations, and also they can also afford a good working judicial system, and then that increases wealth and that increases individualism. So it's hard to say what causes what, but it's certainly true that a high score on income per capita, individualism, and general trust, they are all positively correlated with each other. Yeah.
And the individualistic people are less likely to judge others using tribal sentiments.
Yeah, they are less likely to think of themselves as being a part of a certain group, whatever that might be. So in that case, in principle, it could be that that they are more willing to accept others from other groups, and that certainly is the true. So that then you get what has been called bridging social capital, so that you're open. That has more to do, I have to say, with uncertainty avoidance, that you are open to other people. So if you score low on uncertainty avoidance, so easily accept uncertainty, often you are more open to foreign people, so people from other groups, I would say, and that goes with a higher level of what has been called bridging social capital.
Now we're going to get to an interesting part of the discussion: France, United States, and Germany, and their relationship to cooperation. In your paper, it is argued that the United States and Germany have more cooperative managers. Why is this the case?
They have more
cooperative managers.
Corporate managers.
In the United States and Germany, managers are more likely to cooperate.
Oh, to cooperate, yeah, that certainly is true, and that has to do with this distinction in France between the different classes, between the elite and the other persons. So, France, there is an elite, and this elite has to take care of the others. And now I'm simplifying to a great extent, of course, but that essentially is true. And the lay people, they accept this elite as long as this elite takes care of them. At the moment that they think that this elite does not take care of them, then they are very upset, and then you can get movements like the yellow vests. So that has so to do with these different layers in society. And within Germany and the United States, there is not this great difference in layers of the society. There's much more attitude of everybody is equal and should be taught the same issues. So what we in this chapter also show is that the difference in what you regard as important for teaching your children, which is a series of questions from the World Values Survey. If you then do a regression and figure out whether there are differences between the lower layers in society depending on education or depending on income, so those with a low education and low income versus those with a high education and high income, then you see that in France, this difference is quite large, whereas that's not the case in the United States and also to a much lesser extent in Germany. So there is more an idea within Germany and America that people are, so to say, from the same pool, you could say, from the same class, and it is due to their education, which is important in Germany, and the way they have handled it, that they become a boss, and similarly, more or less in the United States. Whereas in France, the elite is educated not at a university, but on the École de Supérieurs, and from that they are appointed as a director of a civil organization, part of the government, or as a member of the board of a company which is also owned by the government. And that also has a name, and that is called parachuting. So there's a kind of put from above into this organization. And that, of course, also brings tensions with it, because these often very young people, sometimes at the age of 35, became the head of a company or part of a company, and they don't have any experience in the particular company, whereas others who are from lower classes or lower from just a university, they have maybe more expertise, and then they see that their boss has less ability than they themselves, and that of course also does not bring much trust in it, and that's why there's a great of tension between the managers and the other people.
Yes, that's the reason for the lack of cooperation. So, Professor, France seems to be hierarchical. So the French Revolution apparently was revolutionary, and it conveyed messages of individual autonomy, egalitarianism. But even today, as you write, the French are still hierarchical. Why? Why, despite being so revolutionary, they're still so subservient to authority?
Yeah. Now, first of all, this term hierarchical, we also borrow from authors which have studied Latin American countries, which they also call hierarchical. And there is a lot of common between the Latin European countries and the Latin American countries in that sense. And of course, the French Revolution was for egalitarity, and they wanted to become equal. But nevertheless, they could not break the traditional roles which were there already from centuries on. So if we also look at these three countries, Germany, the United States, and France, then Germany is a very young country. It was only established in 1871. The United States is somewhat older, but it's from immigrants, so they all had to fight out how to organize this country. And France is a very old country, you could say, which was already centralized and under all the queens before. And one way or another, you could say the elites, they changed, their names changed, but essentially the organization of the country did not change that much, in the sense that it also there are also remains of this hierarchical system. Of course, that is less so than 200-300 years ago, but still it is there compared to the other countries, and still it has consequences such as a greater level of conflict within companies and between the trade unions and the bosses of the companies, etc. So yeah, that is to a certain extent an attitude which is more or less ingrained in people, and that can change, but it changes very slowly.
But on page 29, you write, of the three countries concerned, the inhabitants of Germany are most in favor of the government owning firms and taking responsibility. Shouldn't this be France instead?
So that's on page 29, you say, the Germans.
Yes, the Germans are most in favor of the government owning firms and taking responsibility. And I find this interesting because I was expecting you to be saying this about France.
Yes, so that is where is it, at the top or at the bottom? Because
you don't need to find it. I'm just reading it aloud for the listeners. You don't need to find it.
Yeah. So the Germans are more in favor of
the government owning firms and taking responsibility.
Yeah, that's just from what I didn't read it again, but from that, compared to France, I would say that's somewhat strange. The Germans, you have some companies which are part of it is also owned by a government, but in general, when you look at countries where the government also owns part or the entire firm, that certainly is France. And it certainly also has to. So that then I would indeed say that should be France from what I hear now.
Yes, it sounds quite strange. That's why I am mentioning the point.
Yeah. So Germany, that's more that the government is very much in charge of setting the rules. So in order to the government should not be very important, neither should large company become very important. So the people themselves should be shielded against the influence of the government, and that has to do with the Nazi regime and the large companies. But in France, that is more this elite which can, and that means that companies can be and are owned by the government. And you also see that sometimes directors of companies they are from the civil servants and vice versa.
And what explains America's aversion to the concentration of power? And this is related to France being hierarchical. Even today, the Americans are still more skeptical of government.
Yeah. Yeah, so. I think that that is explained by the fact that the inhabitants of the United States, they fled often Europe because they were suppressed. So they did not want to have someone who is saying what they should do, and that's why they don't want that there is a concentration of power. Uh, One of your presidents even called it concentration, and now I do it by heart. The concentration of power, even in the hands of the omnipotent, is not good. Something like that. So that you,
Yes, I saw that quote.
yeah. That comes from this very individualistic person who is competing on a market. And due to this competition, what comes to the fore is what he can do and where he is good in. And due to the fact that the person is good at something, he will acquire the job or make a large profit or whatsoever. And that should not be suppressed by some power from above. So there is also, from the very beginning, skepticism and against the concentration of power in cities like New York, etc. If you look in the financial system, for example, the ideal was very often that there was what has been called unit banking, just one bank branch in one city, and that's it, and they have to compete. And what they also, and that the populists were in that respect, I think it was at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, against the concentration of money in New York, because they were afraid of the fact that then that would go against the interests of the people in the more Western states, and who were very often farmers, and that their money would be misused by those rich people from abroad, and abroad was New York.
So far, we've been talking about the uniqueness of America and also France, but Germany is unique in the arena of long-term orientation.
Yeah.
Comment on that for us.
Yeah, that's now. First of all, what is Germany? That's where I started already. Germany is a very young state. It has been established in 1871, and that was not because all the parts of what at that time was Germany came to a conference, said, okay, let's have a union. And it was more Prussia which forced the others to join them and enter into a battle with France, which they also won. So that was a great success to a certain extent. And now I am somewhat figuring out what exactly could explain this long-term determination. In this field of continental Europe, there were a lot of small sovereignties, you could say. I think that in present day Germany, there were more than 600 sovereignties at a certain moment in time. And in order to succeed, they had to cooperate with the others, because they individually were too small to say, okay, we have an army for our own. So they had to have good relationships with the others to succeed. And they also knew, from example, from the 30 Years' War, that if they would not succeed and there would become a war that could be very devastating. So I think that this idea of we have to cooperate with the others in order to succeed in the long run, that could maybe be an argument why they have this relatively high score on long-term orientation. They are also have a relatively high for the Western world on uncertainty avoidance, and that is sometimes adhered to the fact of the hyperinflation in the 1920s, when a large part of the wealth of, in particular, the middle classes was swept away by this hyperinflation. And there has been, and there is still, there are many people who are referring in Germany to this period of saying, yeah, we should avoid it and should have low inflation. That's also an attitude towards having low inflation.
And the long-term orientation, according to research, is actually an important predictor of certain social outcomes, including entrepreneurship. You yourself, you co-authored a paper on the link between long-term orientation and economic freedom.
Yeah.
Tell us a little about that paper. I read it and I find it to be quite fascinating.
Yeah. So in that paper, we argue. So what is well established is there is a positive correlation between the high score on economic freedom and economic growth. So there's a positive relation between economic freedom and economic growth. However, it's not always clear which countries benefit the most from it, and under which conditions this relationship works and when does it not work. And what my co-author and I did, we said, okay, what is then the mediating factor which is important for the fact that this relationship between economic freedom and economic growth is very positive. And we said, okay, what you then should have is, first of all, that if there is an increase in economic freedom, then you want to use it. So if there is more economic freedom, and that is an index which has also a lot, an important part of it is legislation. So legislation changes in such a way that it's become more pro-market, so leaving more incentives for the individual to act in his or her own benefit. Then you should have that people are willing to use it. And if they use it, they should use it wisely and not just buy a lot of goods and then have a lot of trouble because they have a high level of debt. And what we found is that indeed, if countries have a relatively low score on uncertainty avoidance, so they accept uncertainty relatively easily, then that is this relationship is strengthened between economic freedom and growth. And when they have a high score on long-term orientation, so when they want to use it wisely, that's at least our explanation for it. So that you do not use it just for short-term benefits and for consumption, but also invest it and you use this freedom, but use it in a wise way.
Exactly. And this is one of the reasons why people who think long-term could be more entrepreneurial, because they're planning to enjoy themselves or to invest in other projects in the future. So I can earn money because I want to go on a vacation, or I earn money because in the future I might want to start a new business.
That could be, but in the research on entrepreneurship and cultural factors, it's more often that uncertainty avoidance becomes the most important determinant factor. So because, and that's also, so uncertainty avoidance is a score more or less as a nation level, or at least at a group level. But that's all. If you look also, there are also studies on the individual level of the entrepreneur, then you see that what an entrepreneur does is not always very wise, but at least he tries. And of course, due to the fact that he tries, he succeeds also very often. Sometimes he doesn't succeed and makes a loss, but nevertheless, due to the fact that he believes in what he is doing and thinks that it is right what he is doing and will be profitable, he succeeds. And that has more to do with uncertainty avoidance. So, or the opposite, you could see, the fact that you accept uncertainty more easily that makes you entrepreneurial, given a certain level of economic wealth of GDP per capita, because you see also a lot of entrepreneurs in very poor countries, but that simply
Yes.
has to do with the fact that there's no other opportunity to earn money. So then they have to. Then you are a farmer, so an entrepreneur, because there's no other way. There is no well-functioning government or large businesses where you can be employed. So you have to be a self-employed person then.
Exactly, Eelke. And I have written on entrepreneurship, and on this show, on a number of occasions, we have discussed entrepreneurship. Opportunity-driven entrepreneurship is associated with innovation and growth rather than necessity-driven entrepreneurship. Poor countries tend to have high rates of necessity-driven entrepreneurship. So in Jamaica, people often say that Jamaicans are entrepreneurial. And I respond by arguing that the conversation ought to be contextualized. Jamaica has the highest level, sorry, not the highest level. Based on its level of unproductive entrepreneurship, it's among the top 5 in the world because it's a relatively poor country. And studies in Jamaica show that people start businesses to evade poverty.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So this is an
and you say
important point.
similar structures in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, then people have to become entrepreneurial, otherwise they will die. It's that simple.
Yeah, so when we discuss entrepreneurship, we really want to nurture the gazelles, the high growth entrepreneurship that's driven by highly educated workers or innovative workers, people who want to seize the opportunity. They're not solely interested in making a quick buck for the short term.
No, that's true. Yeah, and then it could be that being in a long term and have a long-term orientation is better. But what you see also, if we talk about these 3 countries, that there is quite a difference between Germany and the United States in the sense of the pattern of innovation. In Germany, it's more often incremental innovation. So a company in the Mittelstand, they are specialized in making a certain type of brakes, for example, and they improve making these brakes, and that's it. Whereas, of course, Tesla comes from the United States. It's just a different car than the cars using fuel in Germany. And there you see, and that maybe has also to do with their relatively high score on uncertainty avoidance. There you see that they very long sticked to the old type of cars with fuel instead of electricity, and now they have to. So so there you see this difference.
And the Americans perceive competition favorably.
Yeah.
Would you say that the American system is more efficient?
Yeah, then once again, it depends upon which type of studies you take. There are some studies looking into the factories of different factories of the same or similar companies, and they do not always find that Americans are the most efficient one. They are well known of being a long time on the job, but it's not always that efficient. So if you look at the production per hour worked, then it's not always the highest, and it's more countries like Germany. And very hierarchical system is also not good, because then the lower levels don't show any innovation and no autonomy, and are waiting for what the higher levels are saying. However, if you look at the costs, then I can imagine that often the United States has the lowest cost, but that is also due to the fact that the trade unions are the weakest, I think, in the United States.
Yes, but Americans are entrepreneurial. We cannot debate this. This is indisputable.
Yeah, but that's also, of course, has to do with the fact that the social system in America is less well developed than in France and Germany. So they also have to. But they if you want to do real different things, that's much more easier. You can more easily do that in the United States than in the other two countries. That's certainly true. That's also what you see now, for example, with Tesla building a factory in the neighborhood of Berlin. It takes a lot of procedures before they can do that. And then they still are very quick.
All right, but the American entrepreneurial systems, as some would argue, is the greatest the world has ever seen. Silicon Valley, you mentioned Tesla, Amazon,
Yeah.
and based on what I've read, I link American entrepreneurship to individualism, autonomy, and fairness. So even though America is an individualistic society, it's also a performance-oriented society with a premium on fairness and efficiency.
Yeah, certainly so. And of course, they also have a large market.
Yes.
So that also helps you.
So speaking to you has been a pleasure, LK, but unfortunately I have to wrap up. So bye, and we'll speak again, and I will continue to read your works.
Okay, thank you.
And interview your co-author, the one who wrote the paper on work ethic and development. She's interesting. I'm going to send her a message.
Okay.
All right, bye.
Thank you. Bye.